You know, the notion of identifying a look that depicts or grapples with the effects of climate change-related issues, but how does it relate to efficacy at communicating information, instigating action, or functioning as visually or conceptually pleasing artwork? I think the more important questions relate to what effect an artist wants to have and if art is the most fuel-efficient vehicle for it. There are a couple things I want to point to. One, the expectation or need for art that addresses the sorry state of the planet, or offers some sort of visual, conceptual seduction or pleasure, as Sheila was talking about. I think that's what I look to art for. Some of the stuff I want to kind of talk about, I think that landscape has sort of enabled a kind of artwork that does kind of cross over. And I also just want to sort of proclaim my own sort of seduction by like anti-freeze green, which is a term that I always love to use in writing. This is a piece that I always sort of term that has some anti-freeze green in it. It's a work by Kenneth Tin Kim Hung. It was shown at the Berkeley Art Museum as an online project. I first saw it as a single channel film at Sundance, and it just completely like, you know, tickled my eyes and, you know, woke me up. And it was in kind of a bad program, I have to say. But he's created a computer game that is working with issues of global warming. So it leaks in certain kinds of informational bits, but also kind of works with notions of play, works with an incredibly kind of hot palette, let's say. There's other ones, there's a kind of George Bush up in the Arctic and setting a barbecue going, and Al Gore coming in and trying to like rescue and stuff. Some of you might have seen this work, so I won't bore you with that material. I'm also really intrigued by, you know, the institutions that are that run the art world, that you know, do museums, are museums and the sort of big art systems sustainable? And then I'll sort of go up into another territory. One of the first things that occurred to me when thinking about making this presentation was the notion of there being a trend of giving a sense of beauty to a ravaged earth. I thought about my own substantial attraction to Edward Burtynsky's photographs. This is one of them, sort of my quarries. I love this. I love these pictures. I don't know how you feel about them, and they depict something horrifying, and yet I think they look amazing. You know, why do I want to look at that? What is that really doing for me? Should I be attracted to those things? At the same time, I start to have trouble with what this artist, you know, what does this artist want me to feel about this material? Though I think he's kind of on record as being an activist, or definitely has political ideologies. I mean, I think the work exists within a framework, or can be viewed within a framework of, you know, luminous landscapes. This is less luminous than previous ones. This is one of his works, of Three Gorges Dam work. But you could also, I mean, for me also, they sort of harken back to a kind of re-envisioning of like 1970s Sierra Club posters, or like, you know, where they would photograph pristine, really beautiful waterfalls, or you know, glamour shots of endangered species, as a way to kind of inspire us to want to save those things. Whereas now, is it really about seeing destruction that in a kind of beautiful way that makes us want to, you know, do something or not? So one of the other things, and I guess I did have a very kind of meandering path in terms of preparing something. I think that Burtynsky is sort of working with definitely this view from above, you know, this kind of surveying, and I think even some of what we looked at today, there was a lot of the aerial view, which I could say might actually be a kind of a trend or a thread in thinking about this kind of stuff, which led me to think about this whole series of Above books, which I remember working in a bookstore in high school, and these were like always something you could get for anybody. And I think speak to that kind of beauty of nature. The photographer's Robert Cameron, I did looked up, and is some sort of really like 90-year-old guy who likes martinis, and I'm sure sort of comes at it from this angle of you know, the Air Force or somebody sort of viewing from above. Whereas, you know, Burtynsky's sort of making this trek into these landscapes and, you know, taking us on this different kind of eco-adventure. What I also find incredibly intriguing is the way that this notion of the coffee table book. I have numerous Burtynsky catalogs, which, you know, again, I sort of enjoy. But on my coffee table, as was a book like Above San Francisco. But what I find even more kind of ironic or interesting is the kind of more updated version of this, which is this book called Over, The American Landscape at the Tipping Point, which again features these kinds of aerial views, which I find beautiful. I don't know, do you guys think these things look great? Do you love looking at things? So here, you know, there's this sort of lofty initial kind of above, and now this kind of, you know, shift in terms to a real sort of negative over to the other side. This book also sort of brings in the informational aspects of the landscapes that are being discussed. So things like, you know, not only do you get the kind of visual pleasure of that, but you get it with the information, which may sort of jar you back to another kind of position in terms of it. You know, does it take the pleasure away? Also, just in looking at another, you know, other photographers who are working with that aerial view, Michael Light, you know, pointing to changes in the shape of the environment. David Mizell, who went to CCA and actually just had a project that was in a New York festival that Lawrence Weschler put together. Having, you know, images of rivers that have been sort of destroyed and sort of tinted this incredibly, like, you know, radioactive red. And then another artist, Florian Meyer-Eichen, who is a LA-based photographer who creates images that I think, again, aestheticize this notion of damage, but these are completely constructed imagery. And yeah, I think they will work well. In terms of the notions of these works actually, you know, doing something, I think that becomes the more problematic element for me, or the part to sort of reconcile. And I think, as probably has been discussed other times today, design has had a more visible success in addressing or rectifying conditions. A piece in the design magazine Metropolis notes that it has become increasingly commonplace for architecture and design fields to consider environmentally and socially sensitive structures and objects. However, the idea of sustainability is relatively new to the fine art world. That was written in 2006, but from my sort of casual observations, I don't think a lot has changed, and I think that goes back to that idea of the counter model that sort of needs to be developed within the art world, and can, you know, a bigger project really address issues. And I think part of this relates to design that is intended to create a solution, whereas art's intentions are much more ambiguous. You know, I think you'll be hard-pressed to find artists who really want to sort of state what their kind of ecological position is within certain works.